Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. Top stories from the GB newsroom. The chief executive of P&O Ferries has apologised to the 800 workers who were sacked without notice last week. Peter Hebblethwaite told MPs he was focused on saving the business by introducing a new operating model with new staff earning £5.15 an hour on average. He says he was also committed to finding the 800 seafarers new jobs. Mr Hebblethwaite says the company was left with no choice.
We thought long and hard about the routes to this, and we did consider every single option available to us, and we concluded that every single option available to us would result in the closure of P&O.
You haven't escaped the law of this country. You've still got to do it within the legal framework. You can't just decide that you're going to absent yourself from the legal system of the United Kingdom.
So it was our assessment that the change was of such a magnitude that no union could possibly accept our proposal.
Oh, you're right about that, Mr. Hamilton. I've never heard such farcical answers to a series of questions.
Well, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says the government thinks P&O did break the law.
We think that they have, and even if they haven't, they're exploiting loopholes to the extreme, and we want to fix that. And so next week we'll be coming forward with a package of measures, including changes to the law, to make it clear if you are sailing primarily from British ports backwards and forwards in our economic zone, then you need to pay the minimum wage. There can be no excuses for it, and we'll force that to happen by law.
Boris Johnson says Russian President Vladimir Putin has already crossed a red line with his barbarism towards Ukraine. He made the comments as Britain announced a new support package for the country, including 6,000 missiles. The Prime Minister says the UK is providing anti-tank and high-explosive weaponry to keep the flame of freedom alive.
I think that the reality is that Vladimir Putin has already crossed the red line into barbarism, and I think it's now up to NATO to consider together the appalling crisis in Ukraine, the appalling suffering of the people of Ukraine, and to see what more we can do to help the people of Ukraine to protect themselves, see what more we can do to tighten the economic vice around the Putin regime.
Well, meanwhile, the British government has announced sanctions against a further 65 individuals and businesses linked to Russia. The Foreign Secretary tweeted that restrictions were now in place on those involved with the Wagner group of mercenaries, the stepdaughter of the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who lives in London, and the CEO of Russia's largest bank. It brings the total number of sanctions by the British government to more than 1,000. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president is due to address EU leaders today in a one-day trio of NATO, G7 and EU summits in Brussels. The meetings aim to maintain Western unity against Russia exactly 1 month since it first invaded. It's thought they could agree to ramp up military forces on the alliance's eastern flank, but NATO insists it won't send troops or planes to Ukraine.
The meeting today will demonstrate the importance of North America and Europe standing together, facing this crisis. And we are the strongest alliance in the world, and as long as we stand together, we are also safe.
The president of Ukraine says today's NATO summit will show who is Ukraine's friend and who's sold out and betrayed his country. Speaking ahead of the meeting, Volodymyr Zelensky urged people around the world to mark 1 month since the start of the Russian invasion by taking to the streets and protesting. Challenging and uncertain times lie ahead for the country. That's according to the Chancellor after forecasters predict the biggest fall in living standards on record. After his spring statement, Rishi Sunak said he will support hard-working families, but Labour says he's done nothing to tackle the cost of living crisis. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, told GB News the statement was appropriate given the current climate.
We are in a very, very uncertain world at the moment, and we would be risking the public's money and crucially the delivery of vital public services if we were to spend right up to the limit here. We have to be cautious.
And the Queen is to feature on the cover of British Vogue for the first time in a special issue celebrating her Platinum Jubilee. The April issue will showcase the 95-year-old monarch in the early years of her 70-year reign. Well, you're up to date. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to On the Money.
And coming up on the money today, well, Rishi Sunak faced huge judgment calls when preparing yesterday's spring statement. How did the Chancellor do? Well, it seems the warm headlines Sunak wanted haven't quite materialised. While all Chancellors have to make tough choices, and Sunak was always popular when he was giving away billions during lockdown, it may turn out that he's now pleased no one. We discuss the spring statement, Sunak's moves, what they mean for you, with experts, campaigners, GB News viewers and government ministers. We're in Cardiff, Manchester, reading the post-statement runes on utility bills, fuel duty and benefits. We talk flexible working. Would you trade in more pay and a promotion to work from home? Plus, today's in-depth Money Talks interview is with a business leader from the UK steel industry, which still directly employs tens of thousands of workers. Steel companies use lots of energy, and unlike households, there's no energy price cap for firms. That's Money Talks later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of yesterday's spring statement? And today's On the Money, for that matter. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet GB News or message me at Liam Halligan. Stay with us. This is GB News on TV, DAB+, digital radio and online. I am Liam Halligan and you're On the Money. The UK is heading for the biggest fall in living standards since the early 1950s. And the Chancellor's spring statement measures unveiled yesterday on official forecasts will barely offset a third of that living standards drop. These words, a searing judgment on Rishi Sunak's spring statement, aren't the idle scribblings of a newspaper commentator or a broadcaster. They're the considered view of the Office for Budget Responsibility, the official fiscal watchdog, the government body, which generates the very forecasts used by the Chancellor as he tries to manage our public finances. No one's saying our youthful Chancellor doesn't face tough dilemmas. Of course he does. There's an unusually high uncertainty around the economic outlook, Sunak rightly observed in the Commons yesterday. It's indeed too early to judge the impact of this war in Ukraine, specifically Western sanctions and Moscow's countermeasures on the UK economy. Back in October 21, when the Chancellor delivered his autumn budget statement, the UK economy was forecast to grow by 6% this year. Yesterday, that forecast was chopped back to just 3.8%, with the economy set to expand now by much less. Last autumn, inflation of 4% was expected in 2022. That official inflation forecast for this year has now been raised to 7.4%, a much faster increase in the cost of living we all experience. It strikes me that even though he is boxed in by slower growth and heavy COVID-era borrowing, it must be said, the Chancellor may anyway have made a serious political error. We're facing the biggest drop in living standards in 70 years, yet the spring statement did little to help those on benefits and other low-income and otherwise vulnerable households. That's why the Daily Mirror, OK, it's a left-leaning paper, but it declared thanks for nothing, Chancellor. The Northern Echo, based in the Northeast, asked, is that it? Having heard the Chancellor's statement. Even the Daily Express, usually supportive of the Tories, asked of the Chancellor, the forgotten millions, what about us? Again, I'm not saying Rishi Sunak faces an easy task, yet he's chosen to raise taxes now, building up a pre-election war chest, his critics say, even though the economy is stalling and millions of firms and households are seriously cash-strapped now. So that's my on-the-money question today. Spring Statement 2022. Did Rishi Sunak do enough? On the Money, we have grown-up discussions with people who really know their stuff. Today, I'm talking to Michael Jacobs, former advisor to Gordon Brown and now Professor of Political Economy at Sheffield University. Michael Jacobs, you're always welcome, as is Michael Kill. He's the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association. And, of course, in the studio, reading the spring statement rooms with me is Justin Urquhart-Stewart. Oh. I should call him our favourite economist, but I won't say it publicly, just in case it goes to his head. Justin, let's turn to you first.
Yep.
You and I have been speaking for months here on The Money, since last autumn, about double-digit inflation coming, about the cost of debt interest. You won't have liked what you heard yesterday, but you've been proved right.
Well, I remember a certain commentator sitting opposite me now coming out and going into press saying double-digit inflation. Those growth figures. And I remember we actually sniggered when we said, what do you mean 6 or 7% growth next year? It's not going to be that. It's going to be about half that, which it looks as though it's going to be. And that worrying figure, you highlighted quite rightly yesterday, 83 billion of interest, just interest on the debt.
In a single year.
In a single year.
Yeah.
And I always just say, look, it's about 45 billion. It's roughly the defence budget. It's now double the defence budget.
It's the education budget. We're spending more on debt interest now every year, or we will this year, than we spend on schools and universities combined. Unbelievable.
And because a third of that debt is inflation-linked, as inflation goes up, it goes up as well. This is what surprised me. These are all things we know. This is not a matter of saying, that was a surprise. These are elements which most people could say in advance, this is probably what's going to be happening, without being wildly eccentric about these things. And here we now have a statement which goes against the one thing you actually want a statement like him to come out with. Confidence. It's going to be tough. I'm confident. I can't see it all at the moment, but don't worry, this is actually what we're going to be doing. I want Britain to have confidence to invest, to spend, whatever is necessary. It didn't give us that. And in fact, it probably frightened most people because he wasn't talking about the one thing that most of us know is heading towards us, which is a huge rise in energy costs.
This is really interesting. The inflation forecast increase, the growth forecast downgrade that I just highlighted at the top of the show. When we presented our 5-hour spring statement special yesterday, Gloria DePera and I, we spoke a lot about those. It seems to me, looking at the technical documents, those forecasts don't really yet include the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war and sanctions, if I'm looking at the assumptions that are in there for energy. But I can't quite say that for sure yet. I am investigating that, and I'll be bringing more news on that to On the Money viewers and listeners at some stage.
But what it means is, I think, they don't know enough. I think before the end of the summer, you're going to see another interim budget statement.
Sort of an emergency budget statement. Michael Jacobs, let's turn to you. You are somebody who has been extremely influential in terms of formulating Labour Party policy over the years. You've often graced this programme. You're pretty angry about that statement yesterday, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm primarily an economic analyst, but I did think it was extraordinary and really quite shocking that the Chancellor gave no help whatsoever, apart from, let us be fair, a sum given to local authorities, which we don't know how it will be distributed or who to the lowest income households in the country. The lowest income households in the country exist on benefits, universal credit, disability benefits, sickness benefits, and the state pension and pension credit. And they had yesterday a huge cut to their income imposed by the Chancellor, because he didn't uprate their benefits and pension levels by what is now the very high rate of inflation we're experiencing. Normally, it's the October, the previous year's inflation rate that's used to uprate benefits. And normally, by the time we get to the beginning of the fiscal year in April, the inflation rate hasn't changed very much. So that's not terrible. This year, the inflation rate last October was 3.1%, but it is now, as you've said, rising towards 7-8%. But the Chancellor has chosen to uprate benefits and pensions only by 3.1%. This means that in real terms, that is how much money your benefits or pensions will actually buy. People at the lowest end of the income scale are getting a huge cut to their incomes. And really, when we're facing a cost of living crisis, as everybody knows, of this kind, when people are choosing whether to heat their homes or to feed their children, I think that is really shocking.
Well, during your words there, Michael, Justin Urquhart-Stewart was pretty much nodding from the waist. You are not normally a Labour Party supporter, I think it's fair to say. You're very much a sort of denizen of the City of London, financial services, stocks and shares and so on. Almost complete agreement there between you and Michael Jacobs. That's, in some sense, the chances of pleasing no one here. And let's turn to business. Michael Kill, you're from the Nighttime Industries Association. Look, this is really difficult stuff for the Chancellor. It wasn't his fault we borrowed 400 billion quid to tackle the COVID pandemic. It wasn't his fault that there's loads of inflation coming down the pipe, even before the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the impact of that on fuel prices, on food prices. With that in mind, how did he do for particularly businesses in the hospitality sector, which you are part of?
Well, just to reiterate, my colleagues who are on the are here today. I mean, it's extremely disappointing. Yes, it's tough. We understand that. But as you can imagine, there has been billions of pounds of public funding pumped into allowing businesses to survive. The ones that have survived almost feel like they're going to be let down at the last hurdle. When we see businesses 26% up on costs pre-COVID, 230k in debt each per unit, no mention of VAT extension, the NI deferral was nowhere to be seen, 5p in terms of fuel is hardly going to make a dent. And I'll give you a really simple example. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work with pubs on energy bills, and we had one pub come to us who finally managed to get a contract for energy, £35,000 a year pre-COVID. Is now gone up to 90k per year, and we're talking about a 200 capacity pub on top of insurance, on top of other things. Cost inflation has just gone haywire, and this budget just doesn't touch the sides.
And that's before beer prices go up, isn't it, Michael? Justin, let's go back to you briefly. Do you think the Chancellor, I mean, do you have any... Oh, one moment, we do actually have some breaking news. We need to go live. Sorry to interrupt on the money. We need to go live now to the NATO summit in Brussels, where General Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is giving a news conference. Stay with us.
The people of Ukraine are resisting with courage and determination, fighting for their freedom and for their future. We stand with them. President Zelensky addressed us with an impassioned message, thanking NATO allies for the significant support we are providing and stressing the vital importance of even more military assistance. Today, NATO leaders agreed that we must and will provide further support to Ukraine. We will continue to impose unprecedented costs on Russia, and we will reinforce allied deterrence and defense. Leaders approved our 4 new battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. These are in addition to the 4 already in the Baltic countries and Poland. So we have 8 multinational NATO battle groups now, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Across Europe, there are 100,000 US troops supporting NATO efforts, and European allies and Canada have also stepped up. We have 40,000 forces under direct NATO command, mostly in the eastern part of the alliance, backed by major air and naval power, including an unprecedented 5 carrier strike groups from the high north to the Mediterranean. Today, NATO leaders agreed to reset our deterrence and defense for the longer term, to face a new security reality. On land, we will have substantially more forces in the eastern part of the alliance at higher readiness, with more pre-positioned equipment and supplies. In the air, we will deploy more jets and strengthen our integrated air and missile defense. At sea, we will have carrier strike groups, submarines, and significant numbers of combat ships on a persistent basis. We will also strengthen our cyber defences and enhance our exercises, focusing on collective defence and interoperability. I expect we will decide on the details at our next summit in Madrid in June. Today, Allied leaders also agreed to provide further support to Ukraine, helping to uphold their fundamental right to self-defense. Allies are also equipping Ukraine with significant military supplies, including anti-tank and air defense systems and drones, which are proving highly effective, as well as substantial financial and humanitarian aid. Today, we agreed to do more, including cyber security assistance and equipment to help Ukraine protect against biological, chemical, radiological, and nuclear threats. This could include detection, protection, and medical supplies, as well as training for decontamination and crisis management. We are determined to do all we can to support Ukraine, and I welcome the concrete offers of assistance made by allies today. At the same time, we have a responsibility to ensure the conflict does not escalate further, because this would be even more dangerous and more devastating. Allies agreed that we must also increase our support for other partners at risk from Russia at risk from Russian threats and interference, including Georgia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Working together and with the European Union, we must help them uphold their sovereignty and strengthen their resilience. We also addressed Beijing's role in the crisis. Today, Allied leaders called on China to refrain from supporting Russia's war effort. China must not provide economic or military support for the Russian invasion. Instead, Beijing should use its significant influence on Russia and promote an immediate peaceful resolution. Allies also agree that Belarus must stop acting as an accomplice to Putin's invasion. At today's meeting, leaders reaffirmed our strong commitment to NATO's open door policy under Article 10 of the Washington Treaty. NATO enlargement has been an historic success, spreading democracy, freedom and prosperity across Europe. 1 month since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO's security environment has fundamentally changed for the long haul, and we are responding. But security does not come for free, and doing more will cost more. So NATO leaders agreed to redouble efforts to meet the defence investment pledge we made in 2014. Allies will submit additional plans on how to meet the pledge in time for the Madrid summit in June. And I welcome that a number of allies today announced plans for significant increases in defence spending. At this dangerous time, transatlantic unity and solidarity are vital. Europe and North America are standing and will continue to stand strong together in NATO. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, CNN.
Hi, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you. President Zelensky, in his address to NATO, accused Russia of deploying phosphorus munitions. I'm wondering whether NATO has seen evidence of that and what your response is or would be. And then I'm wondering, did you discuss during this meeting a permanent basing of forces in any of these countries, such as the Baltics, and abandoning the NATO-Russia Founding Act?
So we are resetting NATO's deterrence and defence for the long term.
NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg there speaking in Brussels. Our political editor Darren McCaffrey is there, and he will be giving you updates throughout the day on that important summit. Let's go back to our discussion here on The Money. Did Rishi Sunak do enough during that spring statement? Let's go back to Michael Jacobs. Michael, thanks for your patience there while we just dipped into a little bit of geopolitics before coming back to the domestic front. Would you say, if you objectively speaking, as a political analyst and somebody with all the political experience that you have, Michael, were you surprised that Rishi Sunak got such bad press this morning? Do you think he did make a political strategic error by not appealing more to voters in those red ball seats, which the Tories need to win back if they want to maintain their majority?
I do think he made an error. Excuse me. The Conservatives obviously get most of their votes from people who are better off, but the historic achievement they had in December 9, 2019, was to win seats in what is now known as the Red Wall in the Midlands and the North, where there are a lot of people on lower incomes. And those people will be amongst those who will be hit hardest by the spring statement. And therefore, I think the Conservative Party is in a different position from the one it might have been a few years back, where it is more interested in the votes of people who are on lower incomes. And I don't think the Chancellor has properly understood this. And to their credit, I think some of the traditionally Conservative supporting newspapers have done so. I was very struck by, as you were, by the Express's headline this morning. The obvious reason why the Chancellor has decided to do what he's done, including that headline grabbing but slightly bizarre promise of a 1p reduction in income tax in 2 years' time, which of course will be cancelled out by the national insurance rise, which is occurring now, is that he thinks that this is the best way to win the leadership election, which people assume is coming at some point in the next few years in the Conservative Party. And we know that the traditional view of the Conservatives is that they like to cut tax. Income tax is the kind of headline tax, so a cut in income tax is always seen as a good thing. It reminds Conservatives of what they regard as the great days of Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. But I'm not really sure whether that is what will attract Conservative MPs' support when it comes to such a leadership election. And if it does, I think that would say something really terrible about the present-day Conservative Party, that they would really regard a headline-grabbing, almost a gimmick like that, as more important than the incomes of the lowest income households in the country, the lowest third, who are going to lose out from this. So it'll be very interesting to see not just what the newspapers say, but what the Conservative MPs say, particularly once they've gone back to their constituencies today and over the weekend, and they've heard firsthand from some of their constituents who I think will not be very happy at what Rishi Sunak said yesterday.
I think Michael Jacobs has really put his finger on something there. I was trying to articulate something similar yesterday, the sense that the Chancellor's playing politics in order to burnish his own political credentials, not giving way on the national insurance rise because that would undermine his authority, but building the war chest so he can lower taxes in the run-up to the next election. How about the business side, Justin? There wasn't much in yesterday's statement for business. You had the national insurance increase for employers. You got corporation tax going up next year from 19 to 25%. It goes back to your theme, doesn't it, of confidence?
Well, confidence to try and make sure we want more investment in business. Now, there is no shortage of money in this country. Private money, don't mean government money. We want levelling up into those areas which are not getting it. We could actually establish mechanisms whereby more local money is invested in local businesses. This is not very complicated. And so you could do that actually not by raising any money, but by adjusting some of the tax. Maybe ERS, EIS, Enterprise Investment Schemes, becomes regional EIS, encouraging more money.
Encouraging risk-taking when we need growth and progress.
And it's specifically in those red wall areas where actually those MPs who've been elected, the Conservative ones, are now looking extremely worried, thinking, hang on, we were elected on this idea, but now it's been taken away from us. That will give them something tangible to work with. New money coming into my constituency for my local businesses.
Well, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, thanks for joining us. Michael Jacobs there at the University of Sheffield, former advisor to Labour chancellors and leaders. Thanks to Michael Kill of the Nighttime Industries Association. And we had John Constantine, our favourite Manchester taxi driver, lined up to give us his economic insights as well. But unfortunately, our debate was slightly cut short by that NATO summit, but he'll be back, and all our guests will be back another time. Now, in yesterday's spring statement, Rishi Sunak argued the UK has a moral responsibility to help Ukraine defend its borders. But the Chancellor acknowledged that such assistance, along with those sanctions on Russia and Moscow's countermeasures, would hit the UK economy.
The actions we have taken to sanction Putin's regime are not cost-free for us at home. The invasion of Ukraine presents a risk to our recovery, as it does to countries around the world. We came into this crisis with our economy growing faster than expected, with the UK having the highest growth rate in the G7 last year. But the OBR has said specifically, there is unusually high uncertainty around the outlook.
Rishi Sunak there speaking yesterday while delivering his spring statement. Our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie has been finding out more about how this Russia-Ukraine conflict and the related East-West economic war is impacting the UK economy. Doogie, over to you.
Well, hello and welcome to Stormont, where most of our decisions are made, or not as it is. But yes, the budget yesterday said about security. The biggest security that he could have is to secure his raw materials for food for his own people. You keep the prices of that down and all of a sudden you can get your inflation under control. Now, we've been going on about it for weeks, the price of fertiliser, diesel, the barley and wheat, and of course all of this is playing into the mix of that inflationary targets. I spoke to George Eustice yesterday and asked him about Ukraine and asked him about the inflationary pressures that were going to be felt in Britain. Amazingly, he says that it's somewhere between 6 and 8% they're expecting on food prices by the end of the summer. You've got to ask, is that now to then or from last year to then? And you also have to look and say to yourself, well, the crops aren't in by the end of the summer, so how will they possibly know what the inflation will be on food? Here's George Eustice.
We're obviously seeing some very sharp increases in input costs, particularly on fertilisers and on diesel fuel. That's linked to the price of gas, which has gone up as a result of this shock. And we're also seeing agricultural commodity prices rise sharply as well, with the price of wheat doubling. When it comes to our own food security, we don't import very much from the Ukraine. We're almost self-sufficient in wheat, and the balance comes predominantly from Canada. However, we do import significant quantities of vegetable oils, in particular sunflower oil, from the Ukraine, and so that's obviously an area that we're looking at. Well, look, inevitably, if you get sharp increases in some of those input costs, and the price of certain animal feeds has gone up by about 25 to 30%, that is going to come out in some sort of impacts on the retail price. The Institute of Grocery Distribution have done some modelling. They estimate that food price inflation could be at between 6 and 8% by the end of the summer. So, some significant rises, but also from a relatively low base. We do, as a proportion of household income, spend less on food than the majority of other EU countries.
George Eustice there, the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, talking to Doogie Beattie, our GBNews Northern Ireland reporter. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan, on TV, online and DAB Plus digital radio. Coming up, today's Money Talks interview. It's with a business leader from the UK steel industry, which still employs tens of thousands of people. That's after the GB News headlines with Miranda Shunker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1:33. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The chief executive of P&O Ferries has admitted his company chose not to consult unions when sacking 800 workers without notice last week. Peter Hebblethwaite told MPs under the new operating model, staff will earn £5.15 an hour on average. He says he's also committed to finding the 800 seafarers new jobs. NATO leaders have strongly condemned Russia's attack on Ukraine and agreed for an additional 4 battalions to be placed along the alliance's eastern border. Today marks an unprecedented one-day trio of NATO, G7 and EU summits in Brussels. The meetings aim to maintain Western unity against Russia, exactly 1 month since it first invaded.
Leaders approved our 4 new battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia. These are in addition to the 4 already in the Baltic countries and Poland. So we have 8 multinational NATO battle groups now, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea.
Boris Johnson says Russian President Vladimir Putin has already crossed a red line with his barbarism towards Ukraine. It's as Britain announces a new support package for the country, including 6,000 missiles. And the Queen is to feature on the cover of British Vogue for the first time in a special issue celebrating her Platinum Jubilee. The April issue will showcase the 95-year-old monarch in the early years of her reign. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We'll be back to On the Money in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Liam Halligan. Now, after multiple lockdowns and endless working from home for millions, some companies have applied these changes for good. But some haven't and may not want to, even if some of their employees do. So would you sacrifice a promotion, a pay rise, or even risk losing your job because you're determined to secure flexible working? Well, new research from software company Ivanti suggests 3/4 of employees would pass on a pay rise or a better job for the chance to work from wherever they like. I know what they mean. I quite fancy presenting On the Money from my kitchen table, or maybe a beach. Now, remote working isn't for everyone, with women in particular more likely to be concerned that working alone from home could impact their mental health over a long period of time. These are interesting questions which really reflect the age we live in today after the pandemic, with more people in the workforce looking for more autonomy over their own lives. And joining me to talk about all this is David Shepherd. He's the Vice President of Ivanti for Europe, Middle East and Africa, the company that led the research. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And it's a great time to be looking at this research. As you already said, over the last 2 years, work patterns have changed dramatically. So it was a good time to go out, survey both workers and people also in IT to find out exactly what they were thinking and how the future looked. And some of the results were quite eye-opening. 71% of the survey respondents said that they would forego a promotion for the opportunity to work anywhere. Within that, 64% said they would potentially take a pay cut as well.
Now, the idea of flexible working was usually linked, certainly when I was entering the workforce 30 odd years ago, it was usually linked to women who perhaps were taking time off to have kids or care for elderly relatives. But it's not like that anymore, is it? Because men of our generation want paternity leave as well. We are more hands-on with kids. We are more hands-on with elderly relatives. Technology, if you're a kind of desk-based person, not if you're working with your hands or doing customer-facing hands-on stuff, but if you're a desk-based person, technology is now making working from home possible.
Yeah, 100%. I think one thing that came out of the study was one size doesn't fit all anymore. Employees of a certain ilk, example, working at a desk, are looking for different ways to work. They're looking for flexibility. They're looking to get the right work-life balance. And yeah, overwhelmingly, respondents, almost 50%, looked at saving money as a way of also having a big advantage in flexibility and getting the right employee experience.
Because you're not paying for commuting and the other costs of going to work. Maybe you've got to change your wardrobe a lot and so on. Very, very interesting. So do you think the pandemic and lockdown and that experience has changed UK working practices for good, or do you think it's accelerated changes that would have happened eventually anyway?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say both, but it's definitely changed it now. We've all had, before pandemic, about 5% worked remotely. Post-pandemic, we're up at around 50%.
And let's be clear, working from home, it used to be a kind of, another way of saying, I'm going to bunk off for today. I'm going to have a duvet day. But now, with, if you've got a laptop, broadband, you need to do the work.
Look, productivity's up. People work harder at home. They're able to switch on, switch off a lot easier. It doesn't cost businesses as much. They're not playing in some regard for high-valued retail estate. So actually, productivity is key here. Workers feel happier. They're working in a much more relaxed environment, and to your point, they haven't got the pressures of maybe the commute and the additional spend.
But on the other hand, it'd be really hard to present a television programme from the beach. Maybe I'm working on it. I must write a memo to the boss. No, but come on, a lot of industries are creative, not just the media. A lot of industries are creative. Engineering industries are creative. Manufacturing, all kinds of things. Sometimes you need to be together. You need to bounce off each other metaphorically, intellectually, emotionally to get the job done. You need to move around the office, have those conversations you can't necessarily have on the phone. You certainly can't have over email. So this isn't the end of the workplace, is it, David?
No, 100% not. And hybrid, 44% of the respondents said hybrid.
So a mix of the two.
Yeah, exactly. Do you need to be doing all your meetings remotely? Could you do some together? Team building, collaboration.
And just because you're remote, it doesn't mean you're less committed.
No, of course
not. That's the thing. A lot of it's perceptions, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly that. So it's an opportunity for employers to be creative, to work out what fits to each of their employees. And it may be that it is a mix of home, a remote hub. It may be go into an office, but it's finding that balance and giving the employee the same experience, whether in an office or outside of an office, working from everywhere.
This is big stuff. This changes how we live our lives, how we raise our children. This changes the housing market. This changes transport infrastructure. Crikey, the pandemic's had a big impact on our lives, hasn't it?
It has, but remember that productivity levels are up because of it as well. So it's a huge advantage.
Well, David, I've enjoyed this discussion and I hope to have you back on the money again soon. Thanks a lot for coming in. David Shepherd of Ivanti with that interesting research about working from home. Now, in yesterday's spring statement, Rishi Sunak announced what he called the biggest cut of all fuel duty rates ever, slashing tax on petrol and diesel by 5p a litre. The RAC, no less, calculated that would take at best about £3.30 off the price of filling up for a standard family saloon, while, quotes, only taking prices, said the RAC, back to where they were just over a week ago, end quote, given that oil prices have been rising. Our Wales reporter Lily Hewitson is in Cardiff. Lily, great to see you on the money as ever. I know you can now drive recently. You got your driving licence quite recently, didn't you? So you'll be also benefiting a little bit from this Chancellor's cut to fuel duty. How's it going down in the Welsh capital?
Yes, good afternoon, Liam. There's certainly been a very divided reaction to the Chancellor's spring statement from people and politicians here in Wales. Welsh Labour have branded it as threadbare, with the Finance Minister for the Welsh Government, Rebecca Evans, saying that the Chancellor actually let people down who are most vulnerable in the cost of living crisis. However, it was applauded by the Welsh Tories. They were specifically looking for that cut to fuel duty, which we've seen, that 5 pence per litre cut, which came into action at 6 o'clock last night and will remain for the next year. After the announcement, I headed out to have a chat to motorists to see if this change is going to make any difference to them at all.
Not in the slightest, because I'm 80 and I fill up once every 6 weeks. But it's going to make a lot of difference to people with low money, because that's where we should be looking at. I do a lot of voluntary work for a charity, and if some of these politicians saw what I see about the deprived circumstances that these people are in, perhaps then they do something about it.
Not a great deal of difference to us because we don't use the car a lot. You know, it's not as if you have to go to work every day, etc. So no, it's not going to make a great deal of difference, really.
Well, no, I don't think it will make that much difference. Everything is going up in price. Whatever you buy is increased in price, isn't it?
At this petrol station where I'm in Cardiff, I headed in earlier on and had a chat to some of the people working in there. They said, you know, the prices today are the same as they were yesterday. We're not going to see a change to the prices in this petrol station until they get the new influx of petrol in a couple of days' time. So we'll just have to wait and see, you know, if the change is going to actually show at the pumps.
Lily Hewitson there in Cardiff. Great to have you on the show as ever. It's time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks. Now, the UK steel industry is smaller than it once was, but it still employs nearly 80,000 people, both directly the steel makers and via supply chains, while contributing billions to the UK economy. Now, someone who knows all about steel and the use of steel across this vital industry is Dr. David Moore. He runs the British Constructional Steelwork Association, a trade body which for more than a century has represented UK and Irish structural steel sectors, both at home and overseas. So here he is, Dr. David Moore, my latest guest on Money Talks. David, great to have you on the show. We've talked in the past. I've shown a big interest in the steel sector over the years, and no time more than yesterday, because I didn't really detect much in the Chancellor's statement that's going to help companies that are very intensive users of steel. Now, your organisation, you don't represent steel makers, you represent the engineers, the manufacturers who use steel, a huge body of the British economy. What did you think of the statement?
I think you're right, Liam. I think the Chancellor's spring statement didn't actually include anything on the energy and the cost of energy that UK companies actually use. Although we are steel fabricators, we actually do want to see a thriving British steel industry in the UK. So naturally, we're concerned about the energy they use and the price of steel that comes out of British steel. Over the past sort of few months, the cost of gas, electricity has mushroomed in price.
Oh, mushroomed. That's a great verb, but it's right in this case.
Yep. I mean, electricity prices were something like £48 per megawatt hour in 2019, and now we're close to £400.
That's an unbelievable rate of increase.
Exactly. And that price has got to be passed on to the actual consumer in terms of the fabrication of steelwork. And let me tell you, in terms of the actual steelwork contractors, they actually have to take a risk on what the steel price will be when they're actually putting the contracts together. And the contracts they put together can actually be months in advance of actually buying the steel. So naturally, when the steel increases of £250 a tonne, that's an enormous increase, and it's difficult to actually estimate that months in advance. So a lot of them might well be running at losses in the next few months and years.
Wow. And maybe their viability will come into question. Now, again, to stress for viewers and listeners, you don't represent the firms that make the steel. No. They employ about 30,000 people across the UK, across various sites. You represent people that use steel on a commercial basis, heavy industry, manufacturers. and so on. So your members, David Moore, can buy steel from anywhere, can't they? They can buy steel from mainland Europe. They can buy steel from China. How competitive is British steel? I know your members will want to buy British.
Yes.
Of course they will, not least because steel is heavy to transport.
Exactly.
So they want to buy British anyway, but they'll want to buy British maybe psychologically as well to build long-term relationships. So how competitive is that British steel, given that our British steelmakers are very energy intensive? There's no price cap on energy for firms, unlike households. And UK gas, UK energy is a lot more expensive than many other European countries.
Well, in terms of the actual sort of steel industry, there's about 50% is actually British steel, actually 50% is actually coming from European countries.
In terms of steel use by your members?
Steel used by my members, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
But you're right in what you're saying. The actual energy costs in the UK are so much higher than they are in Europe.
Why is that, David? I've never really got that.
My understanding is there's some kind of discount that the European governments actually give to manufacturing in Europe, and that's about 30%. It's 30% lower in actually Europe compared to actually the UK price. That's a significant sort of increase.
Because their governments are supporting their steel makers more than our government is supporting our steel
Correct.
makers.
That's exactly
That's a kind
right.
of traditional thing, though. Is it an ideological thing?
I think it's ideological, but it's clearly actually sort of a disbenefit for our industry in comparison to actually European makers.
Now, your members, they'll get steel, they'll form the steel into, very complex components in many cases. There's a huge amount of very skilled work that goes on. Now, ministers tell me all the time how much infrastructure we're building here in Britain. We're building bridges and road extensions, and we're building HS2, of course, the biggest infrastructure project in Europe. I remember Boris Johnson standing up at the dispatch box when a lot of the Tory backbenchers were extremely sceptical about HS2, saying, "Don't worry, chaps," and chapesses, "we'll use lots of British steel in HS2, so that makes us another reason why you've got to back HS2. Is it happening?
In a word, no, but as I say, HS2 is the largest infrastructure programme in Europe. It's about £110 billion.
And the rest.
We estimate they will use about 1.7 million tonnes of steel.
Yeah.
400,000 tonnes of that is actually structural steel that British Steel and Tata produce in actually the UK. You're right, how much of that is being used? Well, when I actually look at the contracts that they're letting, the lion's share of the actual contracts for bridges and infrastructure is actually going to European companies.
Non-British companies?
Non-British
Really?
companies.
The lion's share?
The lion's share, yes.
Has the whole of the 1.7 million tonnes been allocated?
No, not yet.
So how much of it's been allocated so far? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. I think it's a fairly large percentage to be allocated, but as I said, the majority...
But within that percentage of those 1.7 million tonnes worth of steel contracts...
I would say 60% is going to European companies, only 40% to UK companies.
That's astonishing. Why is that happening, David?
Well, I've written to actually the CEO at HS2 and asked him the same question. And he wrote back to me and said, well, there's actually no discrimination on location. It's weasel words for saying, actually, we can let the work to anybody, including overseas companies. And that's wrong. There should actually be some kind of percentage that they must actually let to UK companies.
So let me get this straight. Mainland European governments, they're supporting their steel industry and their steel fabrication industry more anyway, and then our government isn't buying British in terms of steel and fabricated steel to the extent that they could.
You're right, it's a double whammy. The UK government's not supporting the actual steel industry, and when we have public contracts which are supported by taxpayers' money, the majority of that is actually going to overseas companies and not UK companies.
Briefly, David, we're almost out of time, I'm afraid. Just in half a minute or so, paint us a picture of what the UK steel industry could be, what the UK steel fabrication industry could be. We're not going to be the workshop of the world again without being defeatist, but what could we be?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but actually the UK steel industry is one of the actual best fabrication industries actually in the world. The rest of the world do actually see the energy and the workload that we should put into steel. And I'm trying to actually sort of engage with MPs. We've got a whole series of MPs coming around to actually companies that BCSA have around the actual sort of country to show them the expertise that we have in fabrication. I just think they don't know what's there, Liam. I really don't.
Really interesting. Thanks a lot for coming in, Dr. David Moore of the British Constructional Steelworks Association, for being my latest guest.
Thank you.
On Money Talks. We'll have you on the show
pleasure.
another time, I'm sure. Let's just bring in some of your views from today on the spring statement. Ian says, why was there nothing to help disabled people like me? I'm on legacy benefits and my wife is my carer. We've missed out on help throughout COVID and now we've got the cost of living crisis. Thanks for a great programme. Well, thanks to you, Ian, and all the best to you and your wife. Cornelia says, Liam, what's your thoughts regarding Russia's statement that purchasing energy from Russia will now be paid in rubles? Interesting one. I'll have to write something about that. Martin says, I worked for 53 years earning my pension and I'm now subsidising people who were furloughed for not working. Those who receive furlough money should pay extra tax. Mike says, good grief, Sunak really does live in his millionaire bubble. Sadly, Keir Starmer may actually stand a chance at the next election after this dog's dinner. A penny off in 2 years? Pathetic. Talking about the basic rate of income tax there. Maybe. It may happen. It may not. Thanks for all your emails today. That's all we've got time for. Delighted you could join me here. We'll be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. as ever, continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On the Money.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Another sunny one today, and there's plenty more to come over the next few days as well. It is a little cloudier today across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, thanks to this weather front that's very weak, but it is just drifting in. High pressure, though, remains dominant and will continue to control our weather well into the weekend. That weather front, though, may just introduce the odd little bit of drizzle here and there over the Highlands, and come this afternoon,